and I started the Langley Parents for Inclusivity group. And we are here tonight because I think there needs to be a dialogue, there needs to be a fabulous panel like this to answer our questions. I also just want to let you know a little bit about why I planned this event. This is a parents' event for parents. We're not affiliated with the school board. We are not part of any groups that these lovely people belong to. We're just parents. This room I rented myself. I actually paid for this room. And I did it because I'm passionate about the need for a night like this. There is no judgment here tonight. I ask you, I beg you, for people, whether you love SOGI 123 or you don't. I ask that you just listen, that you put yourself in someone else's shoes for a moment. Maybe if you're a supporter of SOGI, you think about the people that still have questions. I know I still have questions. So that's why we're here tonight. It's a safe space. We will have some time at the end, and I just wanted to welcome you all, and I'm very grateful you're here. I know it's 6:30 or 6:45 on a weekday. So I'm going to pass everything over to Susanna, and if you have any questions at the end, if there is any information that you feel we missed, come and find me. You now know who I am. Okay? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. So we don't have mics up here, so we're all going to just make an attempt to project. Sorry, Stacey.
Can we get a lapel mic for Susanna? Thank you.
Oh, for me. Okay, so I'm going to have a mic. These guys are going to So my name is Susanna Quayle. I'm going to be moderating this evening. I am a human rights lawyer. I have an interest in the area of sexual orientation, gender identity, equality issues, and I do some work in that area. I also am formerly a high school teacher, actually. I taught in Surrey before becoming a lawyer, and had an interest in these issues during my time as a teacher as well, and worked on starting a Gay Straight Alliance at the school, and there was a lot of discussion and conversation around that, and a lot of concerns very similar to the ones that have arisen now around the SOGI curriculum. That was 10 years ago, but these conversations are still happening, and they're important conversations. So I'm really excited to be here and be part of this discussion. I do want to let everyone know that this discussion is being filmed. However, the camera is aimed at the panel, so the audience is not captured. If you have any particular concerns around that, you can let me or Stacey know, and we'll make sure that if you walk in front of the camera or something, you're not. I know images of you are distributed. The questions will be captured presumably by the audio of the camera, but you're not required to identify yourself by name or anything like that. You're welcome to if you'd like to, but you're not required to. Thank you. So I'll just briefly introduce the panel members, and then they're going to take a moment to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into the questions and answers and discussion ensuing. So immediately to my right is Joel Harnest, who is the Education and Training Coordinator with QMUNITY. Next we have Jill Newman, who is a clinical social worker and clinical counselor. Next is Matt Carruthers, who is the SOGI Education Lead. Also joining us is Saleema, who is a sexual health educator. And finally, we have the Reverend David Taylor from St. Dunstan's Church in Aldergrove joining us this evening. So there is one more thing I'm going to do before I get to the questions, and that is I wanted to talk really briefly about the meeting code of conduct, because these are difficult issues that we're discussing, and we don't anticipate anything will get heated, but we want to keep the tone very respectful. So the first point is that the info session will be conducted in a respectful manner, and disturbances won't be tolerated. So if there are disturbances, we will be asking people to leave the meeting, although of course we don't anticipate that arising. As Stacey mentioned, the purpose of this info session is for parents, family members to ask questions about SOGI 123 and any associated issues. So at the end, when we have time for questions, please respect that that is time for questions. It's not time to debate SOGI 123, that's in place. And it's not time to make statements about it. It's to share information and ask questions of the panel who's assembled. So questions were provided in advance, and other questions may be asked this evening. And we've combined some duplicate questions where that was possible. The submitted questions are going to be posted to our panel, and then the final 30 minutes tonight will be additional questions that you may have. So you may find that things that are on your mind already get answered. If you still have a lingering question though, just make a note as we go along and save that for the final open question period. We only have 30 minutes for that open period at the end, so please be respectful of that time. We want to hear from as many people as possible, so we ask that people are efficient when posing questions and try not to duplicate what's already been said. So all that said, I'm going to move along to these guys. Stacey, do you want us to pass the microphone around?
I think so.
Yeah, I think
That
we
would be great.
A couple of nods in the audience. That would be
Yeah.
helpful. Okay, so we're all going to share this microphone. And I'm just going to go down the row, and the panel members will introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. As was shared, my name is Harnest. I'm from QMUNITY. QMUNITY is BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit Resource Center. My role there is Education and Training Coordinator, and I've been there for coming up on 3 years soon. The main function of my job is to facilitate and host workshops and dialogues, similar to this one, with service providers and educators and healthcare professionals. And in the workshops, we come to understand where services or policies and procedures might create barriers for LGBTQ+ folks who are trying to access healthcare, trying to access shelter and housing, or coming to school. And I'll often do workshops with educators and teachers as well. My department, it's a one-person show, department is just me, also produces print materials, and so out on the table, some folks may have had an opportunity to pick up queer terminology from A to Q, so this has over 80 different definitions and words of significance within the LGBTQ+ community. I can only bring so many copies. If you want to access them online, you can do so. QMUNITY.ca/resources. QMUNITY.ca/resources. I'll end it there because we want to keep this part brief.
All right, thank you. My name is Jill Newman, and I have two things that I do. One is a clinical counselor here in Langley in a private practice that I work in, but the predominance of my work is being a clinical social worker at the child and youth psychiatry clinics in the outpatient clinic through Fraser Health. So I've been doing that for the last decade. I specialize in instructing family therapy and running family therapy clinics, and have a specialized interest in working with LGBTQ+ folks and their parents. And so I've been involved in the LGBTQ task force at Fraser Health, and I'm passionate about that work. And so I've been there for about a decade, including working out here in Langley in the crisis response program for youth. So I've spent time in the ERs providing mental health consultation in Langley and Surrey and Delta areas. So that's me.
Thank you. My name is Matt Carruthers. I am an elementary school principal who's on leave right now, so I'm currently the BC SOGI Education Lead. And so what that entails this year is overseeing SOGI 123, the resources that are online, as well as the SOGI Educators Network, and I'll expand on that in a little bit. But I would like to share the reason why I'm here, because if you'd asked me if I was doing this work 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been a consideration for me. So I think about a few vignettes that have led me to this, and a few of many, but I'll share only a few. So when I was in grade 10, I recall very specifically the first time I ever encountered the notion of gay in the school. And it was a group of us, and I was kind of a jock, as you can tell by my size. I played a lot of sports, and so the jocks surrounded this one guy who was new to the school, and were questioning him because there's rumors about him being gay. And I remember him being at the center of this circle and just being peppered with questions. It didn't get physical, but I remember that time, as someone who was thinking I may be gay as well, that is not someone I want to be. I don't want to be at the center of that attention. That was so negative. When I became a teacher, when I was student teaching, I had a student run up to me. It was a couple months into my practicum, and any of you who are teachers, that is the craziest year of your life, being a student teacher. You have so many people to please. But I had one student who ran up to me in the hallway and said, Mr. Carruthers, is a teacher allowed to call a student gay? At that time, as a student teacher, I'm not in the union, I don't have a job, I didn't really have a lot of resources to turn to. Eventually, it became a disciplinary situation for the teacher, but there was no education involved. No discussion with the students, nor with the staff. It was a disciplinary issue solely. When I became a teacher, my very first job, I had an amazing class. It was a 3-month assignment, an amazing class of grade 7 students in Delta. 23 kids, high performing, just got along well, great culture. I had 3 boys in particular, three musketeers. They were so closely tied in everything they did, to the point where we had to break them up every once in a while, but they were great kids. 2 of them came to me one day after school, said, Mr. Carruthers, we talked about something. This was only about a month in, but I felt like I built a good connection with them. They came to me after school, Mr. Carruthers, can we talk to you about something? He said, sure. They were nervous. I said, what is it, guys? What can I help you with? Well, we're worried about our friend. I said, oh, well, that's nice. What can we talk about? The one boy who wasn't there. They said, well, and they couldn't say it. They said, we think he's gay. And as someone who was not out at that point and really was rejecting that, I really felt like I couldn't do much in the way of support. And as a teacher, there was nothing there that I could turn to. There were no resources there for me to turn to, yet it was a very real issue for these 2 students. And I couldn't believe it. That's 23 years ago. They came out only to support their friend. They made it clear to me, they didn't want him to get in trouble, they just wanted to know what to do. And as an educator, I had no idea how to guide them at that point. When I became a principal, this issue came up many times. At one school I was there for 6 years, or 5 years. 3 students transitioned from my school in elementary to high school, and all 3 went on suicide watch. One of them took their life. All 3 were dealing with sexual orientation or gender identity issues. As a staff, we tried to provide some support. We brought in VCTF. They have great resources and workshops. We brought that in. But as an administrator, I didn't feel like I had a lot of resources to turn to. And quite frankly, I didn't feel like I did enough. And so that has an impact on me. And as I got further into my educational role, and in my next school, we made that a priority collectively as a staff, that we were going to address this issue. Because these people exist, we need to support them as best we can, and develop a safe and inclusive environment. So that's kind of why I'm here. I'll expand a bit more specifically on my role, but thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Saleema Newman. I'm a sexual health educator. I'm based in Vancouver and typically work at elementary schools throughout the Lower Mainland as well as around the province. Usually I'm invited by parent advisory councils to come and do information sessions for parents, followed by sessions for students, usually during the school day for kids. I'm here for a number of reasons, but I'm here really in support of SOGI 123 as an educator and as a parent. And I also am here in support of gender diverse children and their families. You know, on a weekly, if not daily basis, I am reminded by the students I work with why inclusivity is so important. It is not unusual, for example, for me to have a question from a grade 2 student, 7 years old, asking, what if a boy feels like they're a girl, or a girl feels like they're a boy? You know, the other day from a grade 4 student, I had the question, what if someone thinks they might be gay? What do they do? And just last week from a grade 6 student, they asked, would someone go through the same puberty changes if they're trans? Today I was with a grade 7 class, and one of the anonymous questions was, gosh, I should have brought my glasses. Is it possible to get an STI if you're having intercourse with someone of the same gender? Another grade 7 student asked, why do people find gay bad or weird? So these are the kinds of questions I'm getting from elementary students, not to mention high school students, every week in what I do. And so I am just, like I said, constantly reminded of the importance and how crucial it is and what a responsibility we have as adults and as educators to help our kids to grow up and exist in inclusive and welcoming and respectful environments.
Thank you. Excuse me. Boy, I'm very underqualified. What a group! What a group! I am David Taylor. I am the minister at St. Dunstan's Anglican Church. I am present here as someone who is in favor of the SOGI 123, and also as a religious leader who is offering perhaps an alternative voice to some of the rhetoric that we might have been hearing maybe in the newspaper or around the community. A voice that affirms this curriculum and the move to be inclusive and welcoming to LGBTQ, SOGI, young people especially. I am happy to be a face to connect with. If you have any spiritual questions, a person to talk to if you have any concerns, as these very real issues deal with perhaps your faith on a personal level.
Do you feel like you're back in elementary school?
Thank you. Okay. So we're going to move to the questions now, and we've kind of identified who on the panel might be best to answer, but if others on the panel perhaps like to contribute, then please do jump in. I'm just going to ask the panel members, and I probably need a reminder too, this microphone I think is very sensitive, so I'm watching, actually my mom's in the audience, so I'm watching my mom and she's giving me hand gestures, if it's too close, she's getting a little bit mad. So, anyway, so you can watch that hurt, she'll tell you. Okay, so we're going to start with actually questions for Matt, because Matt's going to give some general information about what is SOGI 123, and that's actually the first question. What does SOGI 123 mean?
Okay, I'll try with my, well actually my Okay, so SOGI 123. SOGI stands for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and it's not a rebranding, as it's been suggested. It's really just an all-inclusive term. So LGBTQ, it keeps expanding almost every day or every week where we try to be inclusive. So with sexual orientation, gender identity, it includes everyone, because everyone has a sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's what we've kind of landed on, this umbrella term. And the 123 stands for 3 elements of support that we are trying to provide schools: in policy, in building inclusive environments, and then 3 is curriculum and resources. So those 3 pillars provide the support that's required, ideally for this to be effective. There's been a lot of talk about this being curriculum, and I know it's a bit of a nuanced thing maybe for some people, but this is not curriculum. It is a resource to support the curriculum. And in fact, the latest curriculum, which is unprecedented, they revised the entire curriculum in all grades, is eliminating a lot of the learning outcomes that we used to see, which was like literally a list of things. And if you taught, there's a list of things that you had to cover. And as a student, you probably encountered that. Well, we've eliminated a lot of those, or lessened the list. So there are entry points for SOGI education, but it's not mandatory according to the curriculum. However, there are policies in place now in every district that may determine that this is something that should be focused on in the schools. I know within Delta, we had a policy that suggested this needs to be something within the lesson planning for schools. So it's really going to be the policy that's going to determine that, and in terms of Langley, there's lots of information online in terms of how they're proceeding on it. So essentially what SOGI 123 is, it's born out of the work of ARC Foundation. ARC Foundation is a private foundation, not-for-profit, philanthropic organization that has supported marginalized peoples. And it's looked at ethnicity, socioeconomic factors, gender, sexual orientation, and supported those who are marginalized. In the last 2 years, it's targeted most of its funding and efforts in support of LGBTQ initiatives. So a couple of years ago, ARC Foundation funded a position in Delta, and that was me. I ended up taking a district lead position, SOGI district lead position, and we did some training for school leads. And so we used that experience to build up a network last year. And we had 9 districts. Now, keeping in mind, SOGI 123 is new to many of you, and quite frankly, the branding just started last year. But this work has been happening for a couple of decades in a number of the districts, if not more. So it's not new, it's been happening in schools, but it has drawn a lot more attention, there's no doubt, lately. So the network has built to 9 districts last year, and all we're trying to do is provide, as I kind of alluded to in my opening statement, is provide educators with resources they can turn to support these students and staff that exist within their schools and to make it safe and inclusive. So with the network, we had a chance to get together with our district leads in every network, and they in turn, in those 9 districts last year, had a school lead, SOGI school lead, building up capacity in their schools and within their districts in support of this. What's happened is we would meet every 4 to 6 weeks, and the district lead would get together, share some of the resources that we've had, some of the successes, some of the common obstacles or barriers, and just trying to learn from each other and share and grow through that collaboration. We built up the network this year to 48 districts. So we had a lot of success last year, just building that confidence level. This year we have 48 districts across BC of the 60 districts. So the vast majority of districts are involved. And that involves about 90 to 92% of the student population in public schools. So we've had a lot of success in terms of getting the word out, and we're meeting a need that's out there. I mean, a survey that was done, I think it's 2 years ago now, by the Every Teacher Project, surveyed teachers across Canada. And these are teachers in public schools, Catholic schools, independent schools, and 85% of them wanted to do something to address this issue because they've dealt with it, but didn't feel comfortable doing it. So the percentage of teachers that are actually addressing this in the classroom was somewhere around 30 to 40%. So there's a need out there for resources, and that's what SOGI 123 is trying to do, provide those resources for people so that they can address this issue, because it presents itself every day. It has since I stepped into a school as a professional. It presents itself in every way and almost every day to somebody in the school. A few of the other questions then. So we have learning modules, and I alluded to the network that's developed. What we're trying to do is do essentially a train-the-trainer model. So we have the district leads training the school leads. We just did a training session for district leads last week where we went through some learning modules. These modules consist of a video, a PowerPoint, and facilitator notes. The video was created, well, we have a series of videos. There's 4 long ones that are about 10 minutes each with different themes, and they feature educational leaders from across BC, teachers, parents, students, talking about the importance of SOGI education, but also clarifying certain aspects of it, how to be a leader, the curriculum and resources, how to build inclusive environments. So we have these supports that are in place for training, and that's for the network and through the learning modules. In terms of the curriculum, I've kind of addressed that, but essentially it is just supporting the curriculum. On the website, I imagine some of you have visited because we've had a lot of hits. I want to say positive hits, but there have been a lot of hits in the last month or two. And so there's entry points that are there. It lists the lessons, but also, well, how does this apply to the curriculum that exists right now? And how can a teacher integrate that into their program? So that's what we're trying to do, is just make it as easy as possible for teachers. If they're going to do this in the classroom, how can they do it? In terms of the couple other questions there, on the website there's mention of the SOGI ultimately encouraging inclusivity for all kids. The question is, how is this possible when the focus seems to be solely on LGBTQ community? It's actually a greater issue. It's diversity. And this is one aspect of diversity that has been, there's been nothing but silence on it, quite frankly. And as someone who's worked in the school, closely with staff, for 20 years almost as administrator, I know this was rarely, if ever, talked about. I mean, as a point of reference, Ellen DeGeneres came out 20 years ago. That was big news. It was big public discussion about it. Since then, there's been almost no mention, no formal mention of this in schools. There's been lessons and there's been interventions, but there's nothing formally there to support this discussion, even though we know that gay people exist, transgender people exist. So there's nothing in place. So we're trying to bridge that gap and eliminate that barrier for teachers who feel like they don't have the resources. And I think now people feel as though they can move forward on this. So it's just part of the greater discussion on diversity. And the last question there was, how can parents learn more about their district plans? Well, in Langley, just this week actually, I've got an update. They've posted on their website just an update, just addressing all the kind of questions that are out there, Q&A on SOGI as it relates to Langley. So I strongly suggest that people go to that. If you're in another district, it's all going to be online. All the policies are online, or contact someone at the district level. There should be a district lead who can provide you with some guidance as well. So, sorry, I went on for a while, but I had a few questions there, and there will be an opportunity to follow up.
Great, thanks, Matt. So that's a kind of a starting point for us of what are we talking about when we're talking about SOGI. So this is, as you've heard, this is resources to support teachers in delivering content related to sexual orientation, gender identity. It supports and doesn't replace the curriculum. I think accurately reflects what we heard from Matt. I'm going to move to a question actually for Matt again and also Jill. And the question, we can have it on the screen, it's kind of a long one. So the question is, certain expressions of gender are favored in our culture and promoted in the popular media. Students who do not conform to the dominant gender stereotype may naturally struggle to feel confident in their masculinity or femininity. How will the SOGI 123 resources affirm the validity of non-conventional expressions of gender without labeling students? Well, this is a really hard question.
I was thinking that should be this.
I'm putting it in the middle. You guys find it out.
I will do my best. And I guess in my previous attempt to answer the question on inclusivity, it kind of applies here in that Dr. Elizabeth Sagwick, who's out of UBC and has done a lot of research on this front in terms of SOGI policies or LGBTQ policies, and her research has demonstrated that having these policies in place and having procedures in place to support LGBTQ students and staff has a positive impact on everyone. So when they monitored suicide rates, it had a positive impact on everyone. And it relates to this because we have students who are being teased for being gay because they dance, or because they sing, or because they watch the show that some might, consider to be stereotypically gay. Like, that happens. That child may not be gay. Or they're teased about their gender because they're playing rugby and it's a girl. Or they're doing ballet, or they're playing a sport that may be typically associated with a girl. So having these discussions about gender, it's not just transgender, it's stereotypes, it's those types of things. As I relate back to the question here, it's gender expression is part of the discussion that's happening, and just fostering that greater acceptance for difference. I mean, I had 4 older brothers growing up. I couldn't help but play sports. I loved playing sports. But as soon as I ventured outside of that, with my friends or my family, then there may have been questions. And I know a lot of people feel the same way, that there's some very confining restrictions in terms of gender and what the expectations are with behavior. So when it comes to gender expression, this SOGI 123, these resources are going to, I think, allow all students to feel accepted regardless of how they're expressing themselves.
I think we also have to keep in mind that it's not like we're saying, okay, all you cis heterosexual kids come over into this room and we're going to give you this information. And if you are LB, TG, whatever you want to say, if you are questioning your gender or you're not sure where you fit, then come to this room and we're going to give you different information. What SOGI 123 supports and what many educators support is giving kids consistent information wherever you fall on that spectrum, and to normalize all of these differences between us. I and my team of educators run an empowerment workshop for boys aged 9 to 12 called iGuide, and the context from which we run that workshop is to examine gender stereotypes and what those gender stereotypes teach all boys in terms of how they have to be and how they have to act and how they have to talk and what they should be interested in order to be a real guy. And so we discussed that as a group. And we don't need to ask boys to raise their hand and say, okay, who likes sewing? Raise your hand. Or who plays soccer? Raise your hand. It doesn't matter. What we're doing is we're having these discussions and engaging participants in activities that illustrate it's all good. You can be yourself. You can do what you want to do and own it. And we're not going to be confined by these gender stereotypes anymore. So I think in all of this, we need to remember that it's not certain information that's valid for a certain group of people, and then LGBTQ kids need different information.
I just might add to a little bit of what both of you are saying, and I completely support what you're both saying, and that is that the mental health, the W path, the standards of care guideline for trans health in working with children and youth, and recently had the privilege of sitting and listening to Dr. Joanna Olson-Kennedy, who's the director of trans health care at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and she was talking about gender-affirming approaches as being the standard of care for working with children. And what I'm seeing with the SOGI materials is that this is affirming gender-affirming approaches to working with kids. And so it's not specific for just LGBTQ plus kids. What this is creating an environment, at least to my understanding, in which we welcome it, we are inclusive, and we are supporting all kids to express their gender identity in the way that best suits them. They can be their authentic selves. I guess I'm here because this is a vulnerable group of kids and they need our support, and so it's important.
Thank you. The next question that we received is about suicide risk. So the question was, I've read articles that mention LGBTQ youth are at an increased risk of suicide and self-harming. Is that true? And can we be sure that bullying is really such a contributing factor? And that's for Jill. Maybe
Yeah, so definitely there is a lot of data to suggest that LGBTQ youth are more frequently thinking about suicide ideation, and in many cases attempting as well. I think bullying is absolutely a contributing factor. If you think about teenage years and really over our entire lives, we're asking ourselves important questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? How do I belong? What is my sense of community? Where do I find support? And for LGBTQ youth in particular, if they look to their family and they don't see themselves, right? Many of us, I come from the queer community, many of us probably don't have other queer people in our family or other LGBTQ people in our family. So we look to our family and we don't find ourselves. We look to media or school subjects and we don't find ourselves. We look at our own circle of friends and we don't see ourselves. That can have an impact on someone over an entire lifetime. It can start as young as 2, 3, 4 years old. It can be even more harshly felt at 14, 15, 16 years old when you are trying to establish, again, those really important questions of who am I, how do I fit in, where do I belong? And if those answers aren't readily available, if that representation of queer, trans, or two-spirit folks are not readily available, then I think that absolutely has an impact on one's mental health and sense of self-worth.
I guess I'd just add that the invisibility, I think, encourages kids to think, well, where am I here? I guess I don't matter. I guess I'm not worth anything. There's lots of stats that suggest that the significant increased risk of suicide and self-harming, those are pretty easy to find. Looking them up, the range is 4 times to 14 times higher depending on the population, but significantly higher. Bullying is a significant problem, and just, I guess, anecdotally from my experience sitting in emergency rooms with kids who've just attempted, who, in particular, where families aren't supportive or where they've experienced bullying in school. I've sat here in our community with kids who are wanting to die because they can't live with being LGBTQ, they can't live with being trans or gender expansive and don't feel supported and feel there's no hope. So this is a real significant problem, a significant issue for kids. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment.
I'm going to jump in actually and just share a bit of my experience as a teacher and why I started Gay Straight Alliance when I was a teacher. And This is not directly about suicide risk, but bullying was a part of that. So when I began teaching in Surrey at Guildford Park, which is an excellent school, but like many, groups of young people, there was a lot of that's so gay, right? I heard a lot of that in the hallways. And I found that as a teacher, I'm an adult in this school, I'm an authority figure. And for me as a teacher, just hearing that's so gay in the hallways, it just had this insidious way of making me feel like I didn't belong as a lesbian, as a gay person. That, I didn't feel unsafe. Students weren't harassing me. I was, a grown up in the room, and, I wasn't the target of any bullying, and I had supportive colleagues, quite a high proportion of LGBT colleagues actually at that school for whatever reason. But just hearing it all the time, just around you, even when it's not aimed at you, it just started to make me feel like this isn't really a place for me. I'm not a part of this community. And I thought, if that's how I feel, as someone who is definitely safe here, as someone who's being paid to be here and can leave whenever I want, how does this feel for a 13-year-old in my class, right, who is maybe not out? And I have students come out to me, and I know from talking to them that was how they felt, right? That they felt like they didn't belong. And even though it was generally a very peaceful school and a very safe school, even just that low-level stuff sends kids the message that they don't belong and they're not part of that community. So I began talking with the youth care worker about this, and that's how I was feeling, and what is she hearing from kids, and that's, that was very much in line with her experience. And so we decided to start a Gay Straight Alliance, and I won't go into the whole saga of it because it was so much harder than I imagined it would be. We had very supportive colleagues around us, but very unsupportive people at the district level, and I understand that's changed. I've heard from the folks at ARC that Surrey's really come a long way and is a really active participant, but at that time it was very, very difficult. It was the second ever Gay Straight Alliance in that district, the largest district in the province. The first Gay Straight Alliance had started 1 or 2 years before us, I don't recall now, but they had picketers outside the school, and it was very disruptive. So there was a lot of concern at that time, but we had a very successful school year. We had a lot of great events. Kids had a really good time. Nothing happened in the school. Nothing controversial happened, and the Gay Straight Alliance at that school is still flourishing today. And the year after I left that school, they had a feature in the Surrey Leader in the local newspaper about all the good work they've been doing, their anti-bullying campaigns and things like that. So I just wanted to contribute my anecdotal experience that bullying is definitely a contributing factor. That for me, even if even I, as a safe adult who could leave whenever I wanted, felt impacted by hearing even that very low level stuff, just the "that's so gay" language, you can see clearly that someone who's actually vulnerable, a kid who's in that school, who's hearing way worse stuff and it's directed at them, it gets at you, right? It gets at your understanding of who you are and whether, how you're valued. So that's my answer to the question, although I'm not here to answer the questions, just ask them. We're gonna carry on. We've got lots more good questions. So I'm gonna move to the next question, another one for Jill. Can a child truly be swayed into another sexual orientation or gender identity?
Well, there's zero evidence that I've heard of that suggests that can happen. I think that's a fear that I've heard some parents have, and I think what happens is when people feel safe to be who they are, we may see people actually coming out as their authentic self, and that can look like that's a change, but it's actually creating an environment that's safe encourages people to actually be who they are. I've never heard any research, credible research, that suggests that somebody can be swayed into changing their sexual orientation or gender identity. And as some of the panel here said, there's a lot of research suggesting that people have a sense of their gender identity from a very young age, sometimes as young as 2 years old. We live in a very gendered world. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that question. Can I move on to the next?
Yeah, the next one flows from us.
Okay. I don't know, I don't use the term gender ideology. I don't know if somebody else wants to speak to that, but what I can speak to is that there's some research out there that's talking about gender ideology harming children I think what that may be referring to is a fringe group, that's the American College of Pediatricians, which sounds good on paper, but it's a fringe group of about 200 members that split off from the 60,000 member American Academy of Pediatrics in 2002 over protest of same-sex adoption. They're seen widely as a hate group. They have no credibility in the medical profession. They support abstinence-based education, and they support reparative therapy, which is deemed to be unethical by pretty much every major medical association, the Association of Psychologists, the Standards of Care for Trans People. So I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to gender ideology, but there is some stuff out there, but it's misinformation and it's groups that don't have credibility. And the experts that I've heard speaking, renowned kind of world experts running these trans health centers, are renouncing this group.
Anyone have anything on that? And I think from what we've heard, the description of SOGI 123, I think we can all feel pretty confident that there aren't risks associated with SOGI 123, because it's not the case that SOGI 123 is teaching children anything other than to accept diversity, to be yourself, to have healthy relationships with others. These messages that are applicable to everyone, they're not about identifying children as transgender or not, or identifying children as gay or not, or so on. Okay, I'm going to move to some questions for Joel that are a little more broadly about LGBTQ community and identity. So the first one is a good question to start with there, which is, I don't have any family members or friends in the LGBTQ community. I feel sorry for whoever asked this question. You should make some friends in this great community. I find the terminology confusing, which is fair. I think many of us do, even in that community. So could you explain what those terms mean?
Thank you. I will do my best. Language is really a big portion of my job. And a former executive director at Community once said, we're in the business of language. Words do matter. The old school rhyme of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, I believe. It's been a while since I last recited that. It's simply not true. Words do matter. They carry a great amount of weight. They carry a great amount of impact as well. And so I can understand, I do a lot of education and training. At Community, we use the LGBTQ2S acronym. LGBTQ2S. You might have seen LGBT, LGBTTIQ2SAP+++++, and it can go on and on and on. The language is significant because it gives us language to talk about ourselves, to talk about who we are, the experiences that we go through, and it provides us with the tools to connect with other folks in our community. And so I know that the acronym can appear to be overwhelming. Why can't we all just settle on 2 words and call it a day? But the positive impact of being able to say, this is who I am, this is how I feel, this is how I've had to walk through this life, this has informed and influenced who I am, can be incredibly empowering. I will do a crash course on the 5 letters in front of us, L, G, B, T, and Q, with the caveat that the most important piece around terminology and around language isn't about memorizing these definitions. It's not about getting it right. What's most important is creating a space where people can self-identify. At Community, one of our founding principles is that we're all experts in our own identity. We all know who we are better than any other person can tell us who we are. And because language is complex, it shifts and evolves over time, over place, and over people. Right? We're all going to have different relationships with different language and terminology. What's most important is about creating a space where people self-identify and then mirroring that language. Using the language that that person is using to describe themselves is a very easy and quick way to affirm that person and let them know that you support who they are. Lesbian and gay typically mean an attraction to someone of the same gender. Lesbian for women. Gay traditionally or historically was for men who were attracted to men, but that being said, a lot of women will also identify as gay women as well. B standing for bisexual, an attraction to 2 genders or an attraction to more than 1 gender. We might come to understand that as an attraction to men and women. However, as we expand our understanding and acceptance of gender diversity, I think we're really starting to appreciate that bisexual simply meaning an attraction to two genders or more than one. T stands for trans. There's a lot of other words that can fall under this umbrella. Trans is really an umbrella term. In that trans terminology, we're starting to see language like transgender, which is often heard about and talked about and discussed today. But we're also seeing language like gender nonconforming or non-binary, gender fluid. We're seeing language like gender queer. Some people may identify as trans. Some outdated language might be transvestite or transsexual, which is typically not used within our communities these days because of some of the history of those words. So trans, as a very broad umbrella term, simply means that the sex you were assigned at birth and the gender, how you think of yourself, are not one and the same. There's a difference between the sex you were assigned at birth and how you identify with your gender. And then Q, standing for queer. And queer is similar to trans, this really broad and umbrella term. Some folks in our community have reclaimed this term. I know that my time in high school, I grew up in a small military town in Ontario in the 90s and early 2000s. I heard walking down the high school hallway the word queer interchangeable with the word faggot. And it wasn't used with, rainbow flags and trumpets celebrating who I was. It was used to ostracize, to make me feel on the outside, to make me feel less than or inferior. I think queer in particular goes to show that language really is personal. Because of my relationship with the word queer, because of the history that I have with that, it's not a word that I can easily connect to because there's a lot for me to unpack and there's a lot of history behind how that word was used to define who I was or to make me feel on the outside of. That being said, that power to reclaim is really significant within our community. To be able to turn around and I think visually when I go back to being 15 years old, walking down that high school hallway and literally taking that word out of people's mouths, right, and saying, you don't get to use that anymore. I get to call myself that, and that means I get to define what it means. And that's really where queer has come from in terms of that reclamation process. And it can also be maybe intentionally ambiguous, right? I can call myself queer, and I don't need to tell you my relationship history, who I've been with, who I haven't been with, how those relationships were formed. It's frankly none of your business unless we're in a personal relationship. So I can say queer and leave it as a bit of an ambiguous term.
Thank you. Moving to the next question for Joel. This question's about the impact on LGBTQ kids. So if these kids aren't accepted at home or in their community and including their school, what kind of impacts do you see on their future? So in their further education, what happens at home and so on?
Thank you. And just a quick note on the terminology piece as well. I mentioned at the beginning, this is a fantastic resource. It's our most downloaded on our website. And a really great starting point if you are new to the community or want to learn a little bit more about language and terminology. It's a great resource. In terms of LGBTQ kids that aren't accepted at home or within their community and the impact that can have, I'm going to cite quite a bit of data from a survey that was done in Ontario in 2010. The survey is called the Trans Pulse Survey. The Trans Pulse Survey, it was done in Ontario in 2010. And they interviewed just under 500 trans-identified individuals, youth specifically. And there was really incredible data to come out of this that is significant and telling. The number one factor or positive indicator of positive mental health, self-esteem, decreased suicide ideation or attempts is directly correlated to parental support. And the Trans Pulse survey articulated this. Depressive symptoms within LGBTQ youth. It is 3 times less likely with parental support to have depressive symptoms. Suicide ideation, 2 times less likely with parental support. Suicide attempts, 15 times less likely if LGBTQ youth have parental support at home. This also impacts, and the data suggests similar numbers for self-esteem, physical and mental health, access to housing. LGBTQ youth make up 40% of youth homelessness. which is overrepresentation when we think about the percentage of LGBTQ youth relative to the rest of the population. And we know that mental health, depressive symptoms, access to housing can have huge impacts on a student's or youth's ability to focus at school, to spend and conserve energy for friendships, for authentic, genuine connections, to think about the future and what the future holds for them. A lot of that can be eliminated if someone is preoccupied with suicidal thoughts or depression or anxiety, or poor and deteriorating physical and mental health.
Okay, our next question for Joel. My heterosexual teenager has a tough time at school. Is it really that much harder for LGBTQ youth, and how so?
Thank you. Yeah, so when I saw this question, my first thought was, I don't think anyone is interested, I shouldn't say anyone, I'm not interested in ranking difficulties in life. We're all going to be on our own journeys, we're all going to come up with our own challenges, in part because of our identities, maybe it's because of our access to certain opportunities, family situations, socioeconomic status, it can go on and on and on. And so I'm not here to rank the difficulties that this person will have it harder than this person, but most important is understanding that there are different sets of circumstances that can impact someone's life that require different types of support. Right? And that's what SOGI 123 is offering as well. It's offering the different set of support that's needed to provide a caring environment, to provide an affirming environment for LGBTQ youth. In terms of the experiences of LGBTQ youth and how that might be different from heterosexual teenagers, I think we've already mentioned this tonight, the idea or the ability to see yourself in your family, in media, in your friend group, that invisibility, right? If you don't see yourself represented in those spaces, that's going to have an impact on your self-esteem, your self-worth, your understanding that you do or do not fit in or belong in this world, and that you are a valued member of the community, of the family, of the school environment that you find yourself in.
Thank you. This question also made me think back to something Matt was saying, that the SOGI curriculum, studies have shown, or data shows that when you do this kind of teaching, when you include this kind of supportive content, that actually everyone benefits, right? That kids, when they're in elementary school, can we call them heterosexual? But kids who are not going to grow up to have different sexual orientation, gender identity issues, that those kids benefit too from learning about positive values of inclusion and diversity. So a program like SOGI is not about supporting LGBTQ youth at the expense of non-LGBTQ youth. This is about supporting all students. I'm going to move to some questions now for Saleema. From your perspective as a sexual health educator. So our first question that we had is, will teaching kids in kindergarten to grade 3 about family structures, and that's the focus or one of the focuses at that age level, family structures like 2 moms, 2 dads, and so on, will lead to questions that are not age appropriate?
Well, first of all, as an educator, I don't believe that any question is age inappropriate. If children are asking questions and are curious for more information, they have a right to have an answer. Now, the way and the detail with which we answer questions for grade 7s, for example, may be different from how we answer questions for kindergartners. But I don't believe there's such a thing as age inappropriate. We know from research for years now, that kids only retain what's on their radar and what's relevant and interesting to them, and anything else will just go right over their head. But when it comes to teaching about different family structures, this is nothing new for them. They see families every day throughout their lives. And so, for example, when I'm working with primary age kids and we're talking about reproduction, I explain to them that there are many ways that people can become parents, and also different ways that the sperm and the egg can join. And as a result of these different ways, all of our families are unique. Some families, yeah, they have a mom and a dad, but other families may have just a mom or just a dad. And other families may have 2 moms or 2 dads. Maybe they're gay families. And does any of that matter? And they all look at me and go, no. And I said, that's great. In fact, I think these differences between our families are something to celebrate because they make us all unique. And then quite often, even in kindergarten through grade 3, one of the students will say, hey, I know what you're talking about. Matthew has 2 dads. And then all his buddies will say, oh yeah, Matthew does have 2 dads. And Matthew's sitting there looking super proud because I knew, the sex lady knew that he had 2 dads. Of course I didn't, but my goal in this is to normalize Matthew's family and make sure that every child I teach feels like I'm speaking to them and that their story is heard and that I'm giving information that's interesting and relevant to them too. Yeah, of course.
And, I've had a chance to lead those discussions with students as a teacher and then witness them as a principal as well. And the question about whether to be talking about families. Well, as a teacher, you access prior knowledge to engage students. When they're 5 or 6, their knowledge base is somewhat limited. Now, I have a nephew who is 6 and can tell me a lot more about dinosaurs than I've ever learned in my lifetime, so I know there are strands of interest that they follow. But their circle of understanding starts with the family. And their families all look different. And I can specifically remember when I was growing up, that your family was supposed to have a mom and a dad, and if you're a single parent, didn't want to talk about it. If there was a divorce, no one's supposed to talk about it. Well, these are the families that are coming to schools now, and it's not just 2 moms and 2 dads. It's the different family structures that are in place, whether it's a grandma or a grandfather who lives at home with the family. It's having that understanding that people have different experiences, but at the heart of family, that connectedness between individuals who share the same home, or maybe they're separated by a couple of homes, is that love piece. And so it's not a lesson about 2 moms and 2 dads, it's about family. And it's a concept that the kids at that age understand because they have a family. It's going to look very different from one child to the next, but they have a family. That's why it's a natural starting point. But it's not focused on gay families or transgender families. It's just families. And so this is a natural byproduct of the conversation. And if any of you have sat down with a group of 5-year-olds, your conversation is going to go every which way. I mean, if you want to burn 3 hours, talk about bears and then you'll have stories forever. But families, it just gives them an opportunity to share who they are, what their families, and gain an understanding of the student beside them.
Should I just keep the mic around?
Sure, yeah, I can ask the question.
Okay.
And we may have already touched on this a little bit, but will the added SOGI resources impact time devoted to heterosexual health topics? And if so, is there a concern there? Will there be a future impact on those heterosexual kids who aren't learning about their own, quote unquote, their own sexual health?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can differentiate heterosexual health topics and homosexual health topics. I mean, general health and sexual health even specifically involves so much more than reproduction. And yeah, information about reproduction may not be relevant for all kids. Maybe because they're gay or maybe just because they don't want to become parents. But still, sexual health includes things like communication and healthy relationships and connection with one another and consent and all of that good stuff, taking care of one's body and having information about how one's body works and how our bodies work and how they look, with some variation of course, is the same regardless of how you identify when it comes to sexual orientation or gender identity. I think we can also do a lot to meet the needs of LGBTQ kids simply in the language that we choose to use, and that doesn't take up any more time. So for example, 20 years ago when I first started teaching, even 5 to 10 years ago when I was teaching, we'd say, around age 12 or 13 on average, girls start to get periods. Well, now we say periods are experienced by people with a uterus. Do people with testicles get periods? No. Typically, they would get wet dreams, and we explain that. And so, just in our language, we can encourage inclusivity and help more and more kids to feel heard in when we're teaching them.
Great. I think that flows very directly to the next question. Which is, I worry that the added LGBTQ terminology will confuse my child when important sexual health topics are addressed.
Mm-hmm.